Now these bring me back. Abe's Oddysee and Abe's Exoddus were games that I could not stop playing as a kid because they pissed me off.
Oddworld Abe's Oddysee and Exoddus were two games that when I was a kid I found infuriating. But I couldn't stop playing them because of how much fun they were, and I love them. At the time of Oddyssee's release, it was a game that was very unique and original and had a lot of interesting development. I'll talk about Abe's Oddysee first before I go into Exoddus because there is a reason why I'm doing them both together. Oddworld inhabitants, whose own history is extremely detailed, and if I were to talk about their entire history, this video would be about 2 hours long, and that's if I managed to give an abridged version, created Abe's Oddysee to be the opposite to the violent bloodbath games that were becoming increasingly popular.
Oddworld inhabitants wanted to create art. That was one of their main goals, and they succeeded.
Abe's Oddysee is a game that is ripe with symbolism, the main one being mysticism versus consumerism, as Lauren Lanning, co-founder and president of Oddworld Inhabitants, disliked capitalism as he felt that it hurt the little guy. However, during development he couldn't say that to anyone in the press because it would have been suicidal. But the anti-capitalism stance that the game takes is written with a lot of twisted humor as it's a dark reflection of our own world. The Modokans, the type of creature that Abe is a part of, are these scrawny, starving creatures that toil away in factories as slaves. Abe himself is pretty much the little guy, the everyman. He's not overly intelligent, he's not strong, he's a wuss, plain and simple. He's supposed to be the character that you can relate to, not the one you want to be. And the Gluckins are just your corporate douchebags, wearing fancy suits, stepping on the little guy, destroying everything they can, and not caring about the repercussions as long as they get to line their pockets with more cash than they can ever hope to spend in their lifetime.
When I was a kid, I never picked up on any of this symbolism, but now that I'm older and with some real-life experiences, I can come to appreciate it.
They developed an engine called Aware Lifeforms in Virtual Environment, or ALIVE for short, which gives the characters more believable personalities and makes them more aware of their surroundings, making them feel more real. However, Lanning stated that the ALIVE engine was more of a conceptual theme rather than a technological evolution. Now, I'm not sure how true this is, but during development, one of the executives at the publisher, GT Interactive, tried to sabotage the game because he didn't like it. He took game footage to his boss, who in turn loved what Oddworld Inhabitants was doing with the game and gave them more funding at the expense of the executive who wanted the game shut down.
Of course, nowadays, the exact opposite would have happened. The game would have been cancelled, the studio would have been shut down, and the employees would be thrown out on the street.
The game is a 2D platform game, although I would say it's more of a puzzle game as you're given slight hints as to what your objectives are, but it's a matter of figuring out the solution. In fact, I would say that this game is very similar to Out of This World, which is also known as Another World or Outer World in the UK and Japan. There is a one hit and you're dead mechanic, but it's done correctly. There's not constant death lurking around every corner. If you die, it's because you screwed up, not because of bad programming or cheap AI. And you are punished pretty severely for your mistakes. If you die, you'll be sent back to the last checkpoint and have to do everything all over again, and the checkpoints have some distance between them.
This is a very much don't screw up game. As a kid, I just didn't have the patience for it, but I still loved it, and now that I'm older, I have the experience and the patience to not get frustrated at it.
The game does have a good challenge to it. It's not too difficult, but does require you to think before making your move, and you will need to remember that the levels are designed the way they are for a reason. You'll have to remember how the rooms you came from are set up, as you may need to make a quick escape or need some twitch reflexes to avoid death because you weren't expecting an enemy on the next screen. You have no weapons, but you can chant to possess sligs and have them kill other sligs or enemies to clear your path, or to make them to walk into landmines or make them explode, which is actually pretty funny. Your other ability is GameSpeak, where you can talk to other creatures. You'll mostly use this to guide other Modokans to safety, as there are 99 to rescue. Rescue 50 or more and you get the good ending. Any less and you get the bad ending, which is actually very hilarious.
Now, I wanted to hold off on the graphics for one reason. It's because time has not been good to them at all.
Back in the day of standard definition, this game looked amazing. Everything used pre-rendered graphics like Donkey Kong Country for the SNES, only these were the next evolution of that. Looking at them back then, everything looked real, like you could reach out and touch everything on the screen. The levels looked like actual places that you could go to and could very well exist somewhere in our world. Unfortunately, with high-definition screens, the game doesn't look that good. You can pretty much see every individual pixel. However, the animation is still as good as it always was, everything moves very realistically, even these bizarre creatures move like they would if they were real. The cutscenes look fantastic though. I'm talking Toy Story quality, and the sound quality was very good. It allowed you to soak in the atmosphere.
Abe's Oddysee was a huge success. It was revolutionary and the publishers wanted a sequel. However, that wasn't the original plan.
Lorne Lanning had planned to make 5 games in what he called the Oddworld quintology. GT said they wanted a sequel to the very successful Abe's Oddysee and wanted it to be done in 9 months for the Christmas season. In comes Abe's Exoddus, a direct sequel to Abe's Oddysee. Exoddus is not part of the quintology, but it's actually considered a bonus game. In fact, only 2 of the original 5 games planned were made, Abe's Oddysee and Munch's Oddysee.
I'm not even going to touch Munch's Oddysee with a 10-foot pole. Well, not until a later date, and yeah, it's that bad.
The reason why I'm doing both Oddysee and Exoddus together is because Exoddus is an expansion of the first game. It picks up right where the first game left off. And for Exoddus being a bonus game, it's much larger than Oddysee. And originally, Oddysee was supposed to have other creatures known as Meeches, but the developers decided to make them extinct because the game was too large to fit onto a disc. Exoddus rectifies this issue by breaking the game up into 2 discs. The graphics, animation, sound, and writing are just as good as the first. There are various improvements to the game speak mechanic. In Oddysee, you can only talk to one Modakan at a time, escort them to safely, then have to go back if there was another. In Exoddus, you can talk to multiple Modakans at once, eliminating the tediousness of having to rescue one at a time.
It wasn't bad in the first game because you needed to rescue at least 50 Modakans to get the good ending. Not here. You need to rescue 150. Minimum to get the good one.
I find Exoddus to be considerably more difficult than the first. In addition to blind Modakans that you have to guide and help them avoid death traps, you have others that have various emotional states that you need to pacify before they'll do what you want. You can possess other creatures in the game, like various wildlife seen in the previous title in addition to the usual enemies. You can even possess your farts and use them as explosives. The puzzles are also a lot more complicated. Additionally, there's a quick save, so the player is now allowed to create their own checkpoints, something that the first game desperately needed. There's really nothing much I can say when it comes to Exoddus because it's pretty much the same game, just slightly different environments with similar themes between the 2 games.
If you've never played these games before, you would probably think that this is all one game, although that's not entirely incorrect.
As I said earlier, Exoddus is essentially an expansion to Oddysee, so there's really nothing much more to talk about in terms of gameplay, and the story is a continuation of the first. In Oddysee, Abe works at a meat processing plant called Rupture Farms. Abe gives some backstory as to how he's happy being a slave until he stumbled upon a boardroom meeting where the company was in danger of going out of business, as scrabs and paramites, which are creatures being used for meat, were becoming scarce. Meeches were already extinct before the events of the game. Abe discovers that Moloch, the head figure of Rupture Farms, was going to use Modakans as their next source of meat. Abe decides to make a run for it, escaping from Rupture Farms and becoming a wanted criminal. After making his escape, he falls down a cliff and is found by a Modakan shaman who tells him that scrabs and paramites are sacred creatures, sending Abe on a quest to light the fires that are in the temples where the scrabs and paramites are.
This is where the game really starts to hammer in that magic versus technology theme because you get to learn more about the shamanistic methods of Abe's people.
After Abe completes this task, he gets the ability to transform into a Modakan demigod and then goes back to Rupture Farms, destroys the facility, and defeats the Gluckans. He's captured, and depending on how many Modakans you saved, you'll get either the good ending or the bad ending. The good ending is the canon one, as the saved Modakans rescue Abe and everyone celebrates. This is where Abe's Oddysee ends and Exoddus picks up. At the celebration, Abe gets a vision of 3 Modakan ghosts who tell him that the Gluckans are harvesting the bones of dead Modakans for their own schemes. Abe and a small group go with him, and they enter the Modakan burial site of Necrum. It's revealed that the Gluckans are harvesting Modakan bones and tears to make a beverage called Soulstorm Brew.
Ew!
The Gluckans give it to the Modakans so they'll become addicted to it and will in turn work for them as slaves just to get more. Abe makes his way through the burial grounds and gains the ability to heal Modakans that are sick from drinking all the brew. Abe then goes to the Soulstorm Brewery, overloads the boilers, and destroys the facility. If the story of Exoddus sounds the same as Oddysee, that's because it really is. You start off in an area that the Gluckans are using where the Modakans are slaves. After you leave that area, you end up going through a Modakan holy ground. Then you do a task to get a power that does something, and then go back to the Gluckan factory and destroy it.
It's really the same game, although I can't actually fault it for that because 1, it's good, and 2, they did say that it's technically an expansion.
There's a fine line between an expansion and a sequel. Well, for older games anyway. Unless a game physically locked onto another, you wouldn't know if it was an expansion or not. But now it's very easy to tell the difference between sequels and expansions. So for older games, it's pretty much a case-by-case basis. As far as Abe's Oddysee and Exodus go when it comes to age, they're still both really good games. They may not look good graphically anymore, but the puzzles are still a good challenge and the humor is done really well, making the cutscenes and overall story entertaining, which makes the overall presentation a very good one. Abe's Oddysee is being remade under the title Oddworld New and Tasty by Just Add Water and being published by Oddworld Inhabitants, and will be released at the end of this year on Steam for Windows, Mac OS X, and Linux, the Nintendo eShop, PlayStation Network for the PS3, and on the PS4 in 2014.
As much as I want to give these games a gift from God score, I just don't feel comfortable in doing so. So they're gonna get a good. A very high good, so think of it as a 9.5 out of 10.